Today, we woke up to welcome the sad news that America isn't just losing its biggest restaurant chains. What we're losing right now could be the affordability and stability, job by job. In 2025, our closest neighbor Canada is quietly boycott all flights they considered non-essential to the United States. And that single decision is now triggering tourism collapse. The U.S. Travel Association warns that more than $4 billion in revenue could disappear. That leads to the end of even giant fast food chains like McDonald's, Wendys, and Subway. More than just money problems. It's about millions of middle-class and low-income Americans now being jobless, watching their income vanish even though they do absolutely nothing wrong. How many more jobs will go before someone faces the real question? If even your lifelong and most supportive neighbor decided to turn their back on your country, then what is really waiting for us in the future? This is the Downturn Report, where the truth gets personal. And today, we will reveal 10 fast food giants going out of business, as Canada just boycotted all flights to America. Let's begin with a familiar name in everyone's memories. Number 1. Applebees. In spring 2025, more than 100 Applebees restaurants quietly closed across the U.S. The reason behind the fall down of a piece of history is the skies between America and its closest neighbor had been sealed shut. Over 3 million Canadians used to cross the border every year, and Applebee's stood like a welcome sign on the other side. But after Canada banned all non-essential flights to the United States in a sweeping national boycott, what was once a dependable stream of tourists became a sudden void. Resort towns went silent, and Applebee's, once a symbol of American hospitality, became a casualty of a border that now feels more like a wall than a bridge. Back in its golden era, Applebee's had over 2,000 locations across the U.S., with dozens stationed near border cities and tourist highways, in places like Niagara Falls, Orlando, and Palm Desert. Applebee's was a destination itself. During peak winter months, Canadian snowbirds made up as much as 40% of the customer base at certain locations. They came for comfort food after long drives, for family dinners after Disney days, and for the small but warm feeling of being welcomed across the border. But in 2025, that tradition faded. Reports from the U.S. Travel Association showed air travel between Canada and the U.S. dropped more than 70% by mid-year. Snowbird homes in Florida and Arizona flooded the market. Canadian vacation property listings surged over 300% in just 60 days. Many people can't help but wonder if this wasn't just a travel hiccup, but a systemic collapse triggered by trade tension in early 2025. The United States reintroduced steep tariffs on Canadian aluminum and steel. Ottawa responded with silence. The flight ban wasn't announced with fanfare, but its impact echoed through every airport terminal, rental car lot, and suburban restaurant. In the middle of that chaos, Applebee's, already struggling with reputational wounds from pandemic-era wage scandals and inconsistent quality, was left completely exposed. Unlike competitors like Cracker Barrel or Texas Roadhouse, which catered more to domestic travelers, Applebee's leaned heavily on international tourism. When the planes stopped landing, the plates stopped being served, but the fallout hit harder for the people working behind those counters. Line cooks who relied on winter tourism hours now search for jobs that don't exist. Servers who once made their rent on tourist tips now sit through empty shifts hoping for walk-ins, and for small-town franchise owners who poured decades of savings into their storefronts. It's more than just a loss of business, the unraveling of what supposed a dependable future. They whispered. These folks didn't make political decisions. They just flipped pancakes, cleaned tables, and greeted strangers with a smile. But when a crisis hits, they are the one who struggle the most. In retirement communities across Ontario and Manitoba, elderly Canadians used to call Applebee's their home base when traveling south. Now, the booths are empty, the menus untouched, and the warmth of that shared border moment is replaced with a chill no heater can fix. And yet the question remains, if even Applebee's, the brand built on community and cross-border comfort, can disappear so suddenly, what else might quietly vanish next? And what else is still left for us if Canada decided that breakup would last longer now? Let's move on to a brand whose golden arches once welcomed every road trip, until the roads themselves went silent. Number 2, McDonald's. Remember the happy meal that once actually brought you happiness after the stress paycheck? That same location is now closed. even when Americans still count on it deeply, but it just seems like it cannot survive without Canadians' visitors. When Canada boycotted flights to the US, it triggered a cross-border collapse no one fully prepared for. The Golden Arches, once the last light left on for weary travelers, are now fading across America's most iconic tourist zones. Turning back to the good old days, McDonald's was the default stop for Canadian tourists in the US, especially near airports. Outlet malls and amusement parks in Florida, New York, Arizona, and Washington. Dozens of McDonald's outlets thrived almost entirely on Canadian traffic during snowbird season. Internal reports from Franchise Times showed some Orlando locations earning up to 70% of their revenue from Canadian customers. But by April 2025, over 185 locations had gone dark, mainly in towns where tourism had bled dry since the skies closed, like the video mentioned above. The number of Canadian travelers to the US plummeted over 70%. Wiping out an estimated $4 billion in tourism revenue. McDonald's, heavily reliant on cross-border traffic, took one of the hardest hits, unlike Chick-fil-A with its southern roots or Domino's with its local delivery model. McDonald's had no fallback. At Disney Springs, revenue plunged 62% compared to 2024. Franchisees in Buffalo, Seattle, and San Diego began requesting contract terminations, citing the absence of Canadian foot traffic. But the wounds weren't just from economics. McDonald's had already been weakened by years of scandals and internal decay. Its former CEO, Steve Easterbrook, was ousted for inappropriate relationships with subordinates, later exposed for concealing multiple violations. That hit cost the brand $105 million in a legal settlement. Then in 2023, a New York Times investigation revealed widespread sexual harassment at franchise stores. With little corporate intervention, lawsuits over misleading ads targeting children further eroded trust, especially internationally. Compared to rivals like KFC, which adapted menus and focused on local loyalty, McDonald's felt bloated, directionless, and unprepared, and when Canada walked away, the cracks widened into fractures. Now, the human toll is quietly mounting. Even cooks with 15 years of service are now unemployed. People no longer find their familiar breakfast stop across the border, and working-class families who once relied on a $6 combo meal now face $15 grocery runs or empty plates. Yet out of the silence, something else is litting. According to Mayo Clinic, in April 2025, fast food consumption among Americans aged 55 and older dropped 31%, while fresh grocery purchases surged. Public health experts suggest this shift could reduce obesity and chronic disease, and the good news is it even extends life expectancy by nearly 2 years if the trend holds. Not everyone loved McDonald's, but when a brand that once symbolized American freedom vanishes without warning, it forces a deeper question. Is the American dream quietly crumbling, and if McDonald's collapse stung, wait until you see how Burger King fell, without anyone even noticing. Number 3. Burger King. If you pause a moment, you will notice the Burger King near the border once glowed with neon all night. Serving streams of Canadian travelers craving Whoppers are now sealed shut. Menus ripped off the wall. Burger King once operated over 7,300 US locations, strategically placed in cities bursting with tourists like Orlando, Buffalo, Las Vegas, and New York. In Detroit, nearly 40% of weekend revenue came from Canadians crossing the border for combo meals. But by May 2025, the chain confirmed the closure of over 400 locations, primarily in areas reeling from the collapse of Canadian tourism. Some franchise owners told CNN Business their customer base dropped so low they couldn't even afford rent. The numbers are brutal. At Burger King, locations dependent on tourist traffic saw Canadian-based revenue shrink by as much as 80%, according to Bloomberg Retail Analytics. Meanwhile, competitors like Chick-fil-A, rooted in domestic markets, saw a 9% revenue increase. Burger King's unsold ingredients piled up near border stores, forcing the destruction of hundreds of tons of unsold buns, vegetables, and frozen meat. Beyond travel, the brand was already battered. From 2021 to 2023, Burger King was mired in scandal, underpaying workers, misleading plant-based ads, and a class action lawsuit over exaggerated burger photos. Public trust wavered. CEO Jose Till faced backlash for laying off thousands during the pandemic, while parent company dividends stayed untouched. The fallout spread fast online, sparking Canadian calls to boycott, and the cost landed hardest on those already hanging by a thread. Older workers who took Burger King jobs when few others would are now jobless, facing rising medical bills and shrinking options. Elderly Canadian travelers once paired pharmacy runs with a burger break. Now, they find locked doors. Small towns like Bangor, Maine, where one Burger King near the outlet mall kept nearby diners alive, now face a ripple of closures, and for working-class Americans. Losing Burger King means losing their cheapest dinner option. Maybe losing a Whopper isn't the end of the world, but when one closure leads to another, jobs lost, diners silenced, towns hollowed out, what are we really watching slip away? Is it just a burger chain or a warning that the safety net for everyday Americans is slowly unraveling? Number 4, Wendys. What happens when a one-day shopping trip turns into a closed highway, a dark storefront, and a job that disappears overnight? That's not a headline, it's what happened to Wendys in 2025. As the third largest fast food chain in the US, Wendys operated over 5,800 locations by the end of 2023, in border cities like Buffalo, Detroit, and Niagara Falls. Many restaurants relied on Canadian travelers for over 40% of their winter revenue, especially from quick turnaround shopping tours and snowbird vacation routes. After Canada halted all non-essential flights to the US, Wendys reported a revenue drop of 55% at tourism-heavy outlets. By May 2025, 97 locations had either shut down permanently or entered indefinite pause concentrated in places like New York, Ohio, and Arizona. In Las Vegas, one outlet near the premium outlets that once served over 1,000 customers a day now struggles to see 300, and while In-N-Out, focused solely on domestic markets, posted a steady 7% growth. Wendys began cutting staff quietly without warning or public notice, leaving entire teams jobless overnight, as confirmed by internal franchise reports and an insider investigation. But the cracks in Wendys' foundation began before the flight ban. In 2022, CEO Todd Penegor faced public criticism for accepting millions in bonuses while frontline workers lost benefits. Labor lawsuits exposed instances of employees being pushed into 13, 15-hour shifts, especially in tourist areas. Then came the ethical collapse. The Fair Food Standards program revealed in 2023 that Wendys failed to uphold its own sourcing pledges for tomatoes and beef. The reaction from Canadian consumers: a silent boycott. The fallout is being felt by those with the least room to fall, middle-aged workers across the Midwest, who once saw Wendys as the only employer not requiring a degree, are out of options. Elderly Canadians from Quebec and Nova Scotia who once treated Wendys as their pit stop during long US road trips now face uncertainty and fatigue without rest. Small franchisees, many of them retirees, are left staring at debt instead of retirement. Maybe it's just fries gone cold, but in a world where warmth is getting harder to find, losing a familiar name like Wendys can feel far more bitter. And if this quiet collapse caught you off guard, wait until we visit IHOP, where the loss cuts deeper than hunger. Number 5, IHOP. Every winter, they came in caravans retirees from Ontario, Quebec, and British Columbia, escaping the cold in RVs, and their first stop wasn't the beach, it was IHOP. Warm pancakes, bottomless coffee, the same booth year after year. But in 2025, something is missing. Parking lots now sit empty. The open 24/7 signs are dark, and the silence at sunrise feels louder than any storm. IHOP once operated over 1,700 locations across the US, heavily concentrated in snowbird hubs like Tucson, Fort Lauderdale, and Palm Springs. At certain franchises near border cities and international airports, Canadian travelers accounted for over 50% of winter traffic. When Canada abruptly halted non-essential flights in early 2025, those customers disappeared, leaving a gaping void that no local traffic could fill. By May 2025, the chain had closed or listed for franchise sale at least 63 locations in tourist-dependent states. In Florida alone, Q1 revenue dropped 58% compared to 2023. Scottsdale and Naples, once dubbed the winter pancake corridor, reported revenue plunges as high as 72%. In contrast, Waffle House rooted in domestic, local heavy areas held steady. But this isn't just a tourism story, it's about broken trust and slow collapse. From 2021 to 2024, IHOP was criticized for slashing employee wages while raising regional management salaries, sparking unrest on Reddit and coverage in Vice. A 2023 scandal in Texas where a location was accused of denying service to unhoused individuals sparked outrage, especially in Canadian circles online. CEO John Payton's statement that the downturn was temporary rang hollow as stores closed and jobs vanished. Worse, the company failed to modernize. No strong delivery system, no senior-focused menu, nothing to keep the aging. Loyal customer base coming back, now. The cost is everywhere. Elderly Canadians, who once called IHOP their breakfast of retirement, have lost not just a meal but a memory. Workers in Arizona and Florida, many without college degrees, are now jobless in tourist towns without tourists. Franchise owners, who put their savings into the brand, are left waiting without answers, without backup. And entire resort communities are watching the loss of IHOP trigger a deeper economic unraveling. These weren't just restaurants. They were places of conversation, of routine, of belonging. Maybe it's just a pancake, but when comfort disappears, what else do we start to lose? And if a quiet chain like IHOP can vanish overnight, what's next for big names like Subway? Number 6. Subway. Outlet malls used to echo with the shuffle of shopping bags and the scent of freshly baked bread from Subway. Buses from Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal would drop off hundreds daily for discount sneakers and a $5 footlong. But in early 2025, the buses stopped coming, and at Subway counters that once never slowed down, the bread ovens now sit cold. With over 21,000 US stores at its peak, Subway was once the most widespread fast food chain in America, strategically embedded in outlet malls, highway stops, and border towns during winter. In states like New York, Michigan, and Florida, Subway became the unofficial lunch break for Canadian tourists on bargain tours. But after Canada's ban on all non-essential flights in January 2025, those once reliable customers disappeared and Subway was among the first to feel the silence. By May, over 460 Subway locations had closed or terminated franchise contracts, according to Restaurant Business Online, at major outlets like Sawgrass Mills, Woodbury Commons, and Las Vegas premium outlets. Revenue dropped by more than 65%. A Subway near Buffalo reported a drop from 120 group orders per day to just 12, leading to permanent closure by March. Unlike competitors like Jersey Mike's or Firehouse Subs focused on local residential areas, Subway built itself on cross-border volume, and it cracked when that volume vanished. The damage goes beyond tourism. Subway's long trail of scandals eroded public trust, the shocking conviction of ex-spokesman Jared Fogle, the 2021 No Real Tuna report from the New York Times, and ongoing labor abuse allegations, especially in outlet locations where low-paid immigrant workers faced intense pressure and long hours. The chain grew big, fast, and cheap, but when the foundation shook, it fell harder than most. Now, the consequences are deeply human. Immigrant workers who once served lines for 12-hour shifts now have no pay, no customers, and no security. Elderly shoppers from Toronto who used to grab a sandwich before mall walking, they've stayed home. Middle-class American families, seeking cheap meals after shopping, are now stuck paying 3 times more at dine-in restaurants. And around these quiet malls, Subway was often the last storefront still glowing at 9 p.m. Its disappearance signals not just decline, but a deeper unraveling of place and purpose. No one thought a $5 sandwich could carry so much meaning. But when something so small collapses, it tells you the cracks go far beyond the counter. And if you believed fast food was simply taking a break, wait until Dennys shows you what happens when there's no one left to pull in after dark. Number 7. Dennys. You used to walk into Dennys at 2 a.m. after a night shift, a delayed flight, or simply because nowhere else stayed open. Now, in 2025, that comforting glow is gone. Not because Americans stopped coming, but because the Canadians who once filled those late-night booths have disappeared without a sound. Dennys built its name on being there when nothing else was more than 1,400 locations, open 24/7. In cities like Orlando, Buffalo, Niagara Falls, and Las Vegas, Canadian snowbirds once made up between 20 to 35% of nightly traffic. Their habits were predictable: fly south, drive across the border, and settle into Dennys for warmth, coffee, and familiarity. But when Canada suspended all non-essential flights to the US, the rhythm snapped. The booth sat empty. The graveyard shift lost its meaning. Between February and June 2025, according to internal Franchise Times reports, over 140 Dennys near tourist zones and borders either cut overnight hours or shut down entirely. One branch in Kissimmee, Florida, reported a 78% drop in Canadian customers compared to 2024, forcing them to fire 8 staff members and scale back hours from 24 to just 13 per day. While competitors like Cracker Barrel leaned into domestic breakfast crowds and mobile ordering, Dennys remained tethered to the sit-down experience that began losing relevance. But the collapse goes deeper than flights and foot traffic. In 2025, Dennys faced backlash for underpaying overnight workers, triggering scattered protests across California and New York. Old scars resurfaced like the racial discrimination lawsuits from the 1990s that still lingered in public memory. Franchisees also accused the parent company of ignoring rising costs, security needs, and pandemic-era challenges, leaving small operators stranded with no support. And for many, the emotional toll cuts sharper than any financial loss. Night drivers, the elderly, nurses on break, they lost a place of pause, a spot that said, "You're still welcome." Even at 3 a.m., border towns and highway rest stops, once anchored by Dennys' neon glow, now feel dimmer, more deserted, and strangely vulnerable. In cities reliant on low-barrier employment, immigrant workers and local staff alike are now competing for fewer and fewer options. Dennys wasn't just about food, it was about freedom. The freedom to sit down, eat, and feel seen at any hour. And when that light goes out, so does something deeper. So maybe freedom doesn't vanish with a bang. Maybe it flickers out with a neon sign that simply doesn't turn back on. And if that loss feels quiet, the one coming next at Cheesecake Factory might break something much louder. Number 8. Cheesecake Factory. You used to wait nearly an hour to get a table at Cheesecake Factory right beside outlet malls or resort plazas. But today, those famous slices sit untouched. Once considered the dream destination for middle-class travelers, Cheesecake Factory offered a thick novel-like menu, upscale ambiance, and prices still within reach. In its prime, more than 30% of revenue at tourist-adjacent locations like the Las Vegas Strip, Orlando premium outlets, and Atlantic City came from international guests, Canada being the #1 foreign source. But since Canada's non-essential flight ban to the US, these outposts now face a haunting silence. Not enough guests to fill tables, not enough receipts to survive. By May 2025, FSR magazine reported 19 closures at major travel destinations, especially in Florida, New York, and Nevada. First quarter revenues fell 9.4% year over year, despite inflation leveling off. The problem wasn't prices, it was empty seats. Real estate firm CBRE also revealed a spike in food tenant vacancies at 5 major U.S. shopping centers, tied directly to Cheesecake Factory's retreat from high-rent spaces near airports and luxury outlets. Cheesecake Factory leaned heavily on in-person dining, with average bills double those of fast casual chains. Post-pandemic, it failed to grow delivery, loyalty apps, or flexible pricing, losing domestic customers to more adaptive rivals. Meanwhile, internal damage deepened in 2025. CEO David Overton approved a $4.5 million executive bonus, while hundreds were laid off. In New Jersey, one store allegedly forced a feverish worker to serve tables, causing a viral uproar online. By contrast, BJ's restaurants quietly thrived through stronger digital tools and lower pricing. The fallout reaches beyond earnings. For retired Canadians, winter escapes once included a full meal at a familiar table. Now both the trip and the cheesecake are gone. Mall employees lose shifts. Local families lose birthday dinners, celebration spots, and first paycheck treats. Malls feel colder too when Cheesecake Factory is dark. The whole wing feels hollow. Once a warm nucleus, now just background noise and flickering lights. A meal once seen as a reward is now a luxury. And when Cheesecake Factory disappears from your nearest outlet mall, it's not just a dessert you're losing, it's a lifestyle. But if a palace like this crumbles, what's really left for Subway? The brand that promised to eat fresh, but now seems to be fading bite by bite. Number 9. Red Lobster. Red Lobster used to be the place where working Americans treated themselves without guilt, a seafood feast on a modest budget. But in 2025, it filed for bankruptcy, not because people lost their appetite, but because Canadian tourists never showed up. For years, Red Lobster thrived in tourist-heavy areas like Florida, Maine, and Niagara Falls. Canadian snowbirds were its most loyal winter customers, but after Canada banned non-essential flights to the US, foot traffic collapsed. By May 2025, the chain had shuttered over 127 locations. The numbers are brutal. Red Lobster lost over $76 million in 2023 and carried more than $1 billion in debt. Shipping costs from Atlantic fisheries rose nearly 19% due to supply chain disruptions. The final blow came from a failed marketing push, an endless shrimp deal that turned into a financial black hole. Behind the scenes, internal scandals only made things worse. The Thai parent company ignored warnings from US store managers and pushed aggressive expansion. Even as sales fell, former executives sued, revealing ignored risk reports and poor leadership decisions. The collapse rippled outward. Coastal workers lost jobs. Seniors lost their favorite spot for anniversaries. Shrimp farmers in Maine lost their biggest buyer, and entire outlet centers lost their main dinner attraction. Red Lobster didn't just serve seafood, it served a sense of occasion, and now that it's gone, Americans are left asking if even this small luxury disappears. What's really left for the middle class? Number 10, Panda Express. You didn't need a reservation, just a tray, some orange chicken, and a few minutes between flights or shopping bags. That was the magic of Panda Express, America's mall food court comfort. But in 2025, those trays are often empty. Panda Express flourished in airports, outlet malls, and major shopping hubs. At its peak in 2019, the chain had over 2,300 US locations. More than 400 of those depended on tourist traffic, especially from international travelers, nearly 30% of whom were Canadian, after Canada banned non-essential flights to the US. Outlet foot traffic collapsed. By early 2025, Panda Express reported over 45% revenue loss at tourist-dependent branches. Locations at LAX, Orlando Airport, and Buffalo malls saw sales plunge more than 60%. Unlike rivals like Pei Wei, Panda failed to modernize. No smart kitchens, no delivery investment. And a damaging lawsuit in 2021 exposed abusive training programs, causing reputational damage. The consequences ripple outward. Immigrant workers lose jobs. Mall food courts go silent. Elderly mall walkers lose their affordable go-to. Once bustling dining hubs that bridged Canadian and American cultures now sit in eerie silence. You may not have loved Panda Express, but you've likely eaten there, and if even the most familiar, middle-of-the-road meal can vanish without warning what happens to the restaurants that dared to dream bigger, when even the biggest fast food giants crumble under silence. It's no longer just about food, it's about a way of life quietly vanishing. Which of these brands do you still see in your town? Share your memory below before that last bite becomes history.